President Obama says he still does not have a complete strategy to defeat ISIS terrorists in Iraq. He says he's waiting for a finalized plan from the Pentagon. Senior officials there insist they've already presented many options to the White House, but the president hasn't acted on them. So now what? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Almost a year after admitting he didn't have a plan to deal with ISIS fighters in Syria, President Obama says he does not yet have a, quote, complete strategy to take the fight to ISIS militants in Iraq. The president is largely blaming the Iraqis. The comment came during a summit of world leaders in Germany, heavy on U.S. foreign policy hotspots. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Britt Hume on why the president finds himself in this position. But we begin with correspondent Kevin Corke traveling with the president in Austria. Good evening, Kevin.
Brett, good evening. Take a look at this. It's in a word, awkward. Earlier today, the president was seated right next to the Iraqi prime minister for about 45 seconds, and the two men never so much as said a single word. I'm not even sure if the president saw him. Now, later, they would meet in a bilateral meeting during which the president outlined his evolving strategy to help Iraq defeat ISIS. In concluding what he called a productive summit, the president admitted when it came to finalizing a strategy to defeat ISIS, he's still got a lot of work to do.
We don't yet have a complete strategy because it requires commitments on the part of the Iraqis as well.
His statement today seemed to mirror comments about the terror group that he made back in August of last year.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet.
That was 10 months ago. And the latest Fox News survey shows that a vast majority, 71%, still don't think the president has a clear strategy to defeat ISIS. Despite continuous training and thousands of U.S.-led airstrikes, Iraqi security forces continue to struggle in that fight. Today, the president offered to do more.
We are going to continue to provide the supplies that are necessary for Iraqi forces to successfully mount offensive campaigns.
Though global trade, the faltering Greek economy, and climate change were high on the agenda at the summit, dealing with Russian aggression in Ukraine was a top priority for the White House. And in perhaps his most significant accomplishment, the president convinced European leaders to maintain economic sanctions on Russia, the result of Vladimir Putin's unlawful incursion into Ukraine.
Does he continue to wreck his country's economy and continue Russia's isolation in pursuit of a wrong-headed desire to recreate the glories of the Soviet Empire?
The decision to maintain sanctions was a complicated one for many G7 partners, especially Germany, for whom Russia is a major energy supplier and shares a role in the Iran nuclear talks. But experts say even more should be done to rein in an increasingly disruptive Moscow.
The sort of underlying dynamics on the ground are changing at a time when I think the United States should be considering additional sanctions on top of the renewal.
Meanwhile, for the first time, the president addressed the recent hacking of federal employee data, which is believed to have been perpetrated by the Chinese.
We have to be as nimble, as aggressive, and as well-resourced as those who are trying to break into these systems.
And this just into Fox News. A defense official confirms tonight that ISIS militants in Libya have kidnapped 88 Christians. Brett?
Kevin Corke traveling with the president in a foggy Austria early Tuesday morning. Kevin, thank you. So is President Obama, in essence, turning back the clock when it comes to Iraq policy? Senior political analyst Britt Hume is here tonight with some thoughts on that. Good evening, Britt.
Hi, Brett. Mr. Obama's acknowledgement today that he doesn't have a complete strategy for defeating ISIS has made a lot of headlines. But something else he said may have been more telling. Speaking of the failures of Iraqi forces, Mr. Obama said, quote, "Where we've trained Iraqi forces directly and equipped them and we have train and assist posture, they operate effectively." That is exactly the state of affairs Mr. Obama found when he took office. The surge of U.S. troops under President Bush had crushed al-Qaeda in Iraq, ISIS's predecessor, and Iraqi forces had assumed much of the country's security burden. The U.S. presence was receding. But U.S. forces were still deeply involved in training and assisting their Iraqi counterparts. In 2008, President Obama, admitted the surge had succeeded, and 3 years later he called Iraq, quote, "an extraordinary achievement." That year, 2011, had seen more than 40,000 U.S. troops in the country. A year later, there were about 4,000, and the Iraqi army has not been the same since. There are many reasons, but one seems clear. When American forces in sufficient number are deeply involved, training, assisting, and influencing Iraqi forces, they fight well. Not only that, but Iraqi leaders behave better. Pull nearly all the U.S. forces out, and you get the opposite result. The president at last may have come to recognize this, or at least we can hope so. Brett?
Britt, in recent months, I've talked to a lot of people in the military, special ops. They feel a little restrained. There's a growing frustration there. And then after this comment today about not having a strategy, waiting for the Pentagon to provide plans, our producer over at the Pentagon said, speaking to a military official, what was that? We've given him lots of options. He hasn't acted on any of them.
Boy, that has a ring of truth, doesn't it? I mean, and what's more, Brett, I mean, when you think back to August, the president finally said he did have a plan and a strategy to, using Iraqi forces and other indigenous forces, defeat ISIS. So now we're hearing him talking about essentially the same concept, but he said he doesn't have a plan. So it does make you wonder about, what's he been doing?
Brett, as always, thanks.
You bet.
Tonight we're getting a look at the fatal confrontation between law enforcement and a terror suspect last week. Authorities in Boston have released surveillance video showing the shooting of 26-year-old Osama Rahim after they attempted to question him about a suspected plan to kill police officers. They say Rahim refused to drop a military-style knife before he was shot. More alarming news tonight about airline safety. A Homeland Security Inspector General's report says the TSA missed at least 73 people working in the airline industry who were on the government's terror watch list. The people had jobs as airport vendors and other workers. Apparently, TSA did not have access to the full terror watch list. TSA officials now say they're requesting access to additional information. Meanwhile, one Republican senator says this just compounds problems after last week's revelations about the TSA.
The public knows last week the leaked report showed that 67 out of 70 times since last August, when our auditors tried to smuggle weapons and simulated explosives on the plane, they were successful. The terrorists only need to be successful one time. What happens when we're failing 96% of the time? Obviously, there's still real risk and real danger.
A Senate committee will hold a hearing on the TSA's problems tomorrow. Law enforcement in New York State is right now conducting a massive manhunt for two convicted killers who broke out of a maximum security prison Saturday. Correspondent David Lee Miller has an update tonight.
Authorities are not taking any chances. More than 48 hours after two inmates broke out of the Clinton Correctional Facility, corrections officers stand guard outside the prison. Other officers were bussed to areas nearby to assist in the manhunt. Multiple checkpoints in the region screen all vehicles. Residents of this otherwise peaceful community in New York's Adirondack Mountains are scared.
It was kind of shocking knowing that two people actually escaped.
The inmates, 49-year-old Richard Matt and 34-year-old David Sweat, both convicted murderers, were discovered missing 5:30 Saturday morning during a routine bed check. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo visited the prison only 20 miles from the Canadian border. He was shown how the pair used power tools, cut through a steel wall, navigated a catwalk used for utility cables, and shimmied a distance of nearly a city block through a 24-inch pipe before emerging from a manhole. The men left behind a note that read, "Have a nice day." Authorities won't comment on a report a female employee at the prison might have been an accomplice. A weekend inventory of power tools used at the prison showed all accounted for, fueling speculation they got outside help.
We're looking at the private contractors and some of the civilian employees to see if they were supplying the equipment that these people needed to do it, because they obviously had to have assistance.
Authorities say they have received more than 300 leads, but with the pair on the run almost 3 full days, each passing minute makes apprehending them only increasingly difficult. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says the prison break has led to a crisis situation in the state. New York is offering an unprecedented $100,000 reward for the information leading to the apprehension of the two men. The governor says the reward is, quote, unusual, but appropriate. Brett?
David Lee Miller live outside the prison. David Lee, thank you. Up next, Republican presidential hopefuls try to fill out their foreign policy resumes. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 43 in York, Pennsylvania, with a response to a blaze at a chemical plant. Authorities asked residents within a mile of that facility to shelter in place. Officials initially described the fire as a major hazmat incident, but later said the smoke from the blaze is not considered toxic. Fox 13 in Tampa with the arrest of former Disney and SeaWorld workers in an undercover child sex ring. Washington Post reporting 22 people were busted, some of them working in the tourism industry. Deputies posed as adolescent girls and one of their parents in an internet chat room or multiple chat rooms and lured suspects to a vacant house where they were apprehended. And this is a live look at New York from Fox 5. The big story there tonight, chaos at a Summer Jam concert. New Jersey State Police report several arrests outside MetLife Stadium Sunday as fans tried to get into a sold-out hip-hop event. Police used tear gas to try to break up that crowd. There were no major injuries reported. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.